The general manager cleared his throat, announcing my promotion to regional lead. Dean Pritchard, leaning against the doorway, chuckled. Regional lead? Little Jed, he drawled, his eyes sweeping the room. The warmth in the room vanished, replaced by a suffocating silence. I felt every eye on me, my new authority already undermined. Dean just smiled. The miniature recorder felt cold and metallic against my palm. I slipped it into the breast pocket of my suit jacket, a foreign object in a life that had, until recently, been entirely predictable. It felt like I was preparing for a stage play where I didn't know the lines, a stranger in my own skin, in my own home. My life before this, before the mess, as I'd come to call it, had been a decent one. I'd built a good career in regional sales, moved up through the ranks at Miller Steel. Audrey and I had a nice house on the north side of town, a manicured lawn, 2 cars in the driveway. It was the kind of stable, Midwestern existence people envied, not one you'd ever expect to involve a hidden device in your clothing. He walked into my office a week later, unannounced, the same way he always had, like he owned the place. Dean Pritchard. Even after 20 years, the swagger hadn't faded. He carried it with him like a second skin, a golden sheen around his shoulders. The scent of an expensive cologne, something woody and sharp, preceded him. He paused in the doorway, a broad, unsettling smile already fixed on his face, his eyes sweeping my office. The framed photographs of Audrey and me on my credenza, my plaque for Salesman of the Year, the neat stacks of paperwork on my desk, he took it all in, slowly. Well, he drawled, pushing off the doorframe. He moved with the casual grace of someone who'd never known an awkward moment in his life. He wore a tailored suit, darker than mine, with a silk tie that must have cost more than my weekly groceries. Dean Pritchard, the golden boy, and I, Jedediah Miller, was still strange Jed, the kid who read too much, who kept to himself. The dynamic was as clear and sharp as it had been on the high school football field, where he'd been the star quarterback, and I'd been, well, just Jed. He stopped in front of my desk, picking up the small nameplate I kept there. Jedediah Miller, regional lead. Regional lead. His thumb ran over the raised lettering. Jedediah Miller, boss, he mused, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked up, meeting my gaze. Still strange Jed to me, though. The words were delivered softly, but they landed with the familiar weight of a fist. I felt the old anger prickle at the back of my neck, a familiar burn. I pushed it down, focusing instead on the thick stack of papers on my desk, the preliminary contract for Pritchard Industries. A major account, hundreds of thousands of dollars in steel. Dean, I managed, my voice flat, professional. What can I do for you? He set the nameplate back down, not quite straight. Just passing through, heard you were doing well for yourself, Jed. Regional lead, impressive, for someone like you. He leaned forward slightly, resting his palms on the edge of my desk, invading my space. His eyes, the same piercing blue I remembered, seemed to bore right through me. Pritchard Industries, we're doing quite a bit ourselves these days. Diversifying, steel, construction, tech, you name it. Money just keeps piling up. He laughed, a short, dry sound. It's almost a problem sometimes. All that wealth. I nodded, gripping the armrests of my chair. I heard you had some projects. That's why I put together this proposal for your upcoming builds. I gestured to the contract. Miller Steel has always been reliable. Quality product, on-time delivery. Dean picked up the contract, flipping through it idly, not really reading. Sure, Miller Steel. Good reputation, I suppose. He closed the folder and set it down. Look, Jed, business is business. But I was thinking, my wife Melanie, she's new to the area. She'd love to meet some of my old school friends. We should do dinner, get the wives together. I'm curious about the woman who managed to tame old strange Jed. His smile widened, showing a flash of white teeth. What do you say? Saturday night? The invitation felt like a trap, carefully laid. My gut tightened. I wanted to refuse, to tell him I was busy, that I had other plans. But the contract lay there, a silent, weighty argument. This deal could secure a significant bonus, ensure my department met its quarterly goals. It was too big to ignore. Saturday night, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. All right, Dean, we'll be there. That evening, over meatloaf and mashed potatoes, I told Audrey, Dean Pritchard stopped by the office today. He wants us to have dinner with him and his wife on Saturday. Audrey brightened, a genuine smile spreading across her face. Dean Pritchard? From high school? Oh, Jed, we absolutely have to. I want to meet the legend who knew little Jed. What's he like now? Is he still that big popular guy? Her enthusiasm felt like a lead weight in my stomach. She didn't know Dean, not like I did. She saw only the novelty, the curiosity of a past brought back to life. I hesitated, a distinct premonition settling over me, cold and heavy, but the words were out. He suggested Bob Lee's, I said, my voice carefully even. 7 o'clock. We had been seated for nearly 20 minutes when Dean finally strode through the entrance of Bob Lee's, his presence filling the space. He spotted us immediately, a casual wave of his hand. Melanie, his wife, trailed a few steps behind him, a small, polite smile fixed on her face. Dean offered a quick, practiced apology as he pulled out a chair for Melanie. Sorry, folks, had a client call run long. You know how it is, the demands of a growing empire. He winked as if sharing a private joke with the entire restaurant. I stood gesturing to Audrey. Dean, this is my wife, Audrey. Audrey, this is Dean Pritchard from high school, and his wife, Melanie. Dean's eyes, which had held a casual disinterest when he first walked in, shifted as he looked at Audrey. It wasn't overtly lewd, but it was a calculated, assessing gaze that made my stomach clench. It was predatory, like a hawk spotting something from a distance. He stepped forward, taking Audrey's hand in his, and held it, just a little too long. His thumb brushed over the back of her hand, a gesture that seemed both familiar and entirely out of place for a first meeting. Audrey, unaware of the subtle invasion, laughed, a light, genuine sound that always put people at ease. She didn't pull her hand away immediately, instead allowing the extended contact. It's so nice to finally meet you, Dean. Jed's told me so much about you. Dean's smile widened, a flash of white teeth, and I recognized the expression. It was the same one he used before delivering a cutting remark disguised as a compliment. Oh, I bet he has, Dean drawled, releasing her hand at last. He settled into his seat, leaning back with an air of absolute command. Jed was my favorite project back in school. Kept me on my toes. His gaze flicked to me, a silent challenge. For the next hour over Caesar salads and breadsticks, Dean regaled Audrey with tales from my childhood. He made it into a performance, weaving a narrative where I was the bumbling sidekick and he was the charming, patient friend trying to guide me. He started with the time in 5th grade when I'd eaten too much cotton candy at the county fair and thrown up on Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias. Audrey giggled, covering her mouth with her hand, looking at me with a mixture of amusement and fondness. Then came the infamous Moby Dick incident in junior high English, where I'd confused the whale with a large, unidentifiable fish and written a whole essay about the wrong creature. Dean recounted it with dramatic flair, emphasizing my earnest, bewildered expression. Audrey leaned forward, utterly captivated, her laughter echoing lightly in the restaurant. I saw the new amusement in her eyes, a kind of paternalistic fondness that made my skin crawl. This wasn't her husband she was hearing about. It was a character, a caricature. He moved on to the time I'd tried to ask Shelley Johnson to the homecoming dance in 10th grade, only to stammer so badly she snorted milk out her nose. Poor Jed, Dean said, shaking his head with mock sympathy. He really put his heart into it, didn't he? Always so serious about everything. He painted himself as the helpful friend who'd later stepped in to smooth things over, never mentioning that he had been the one who dared me to approach her, knowing full well I'd botch it. He omitted every instance of his own deliberate cruelties, the shoves in the hallway, the whispered taunts, the careful way he'd orchestrated my public embarrassments for his own entertainment. In his version, he was the loyal companion, the supportive peer. Audrey laughed genuinely at every story, turning to me after each one, her eyes sparkling. Oh, Jed, you were such a little goofball. Why didn't you ever tell me these things? I tried to interject, to lighten the mood, to steer the conversation away from my public shaming. Well, some things are better left in the past, Aud. Kids being kids, you know. Dean cut me off, a dismissive wave of his hand. Oh, come on, Jed. It wasn't traumatic. Just kids being kids. You're still too sensitive, always were. Can't take a joke, can you? The comment, delivered with a smile, was a subtle jab, carefully placed. It implied I was overly dramatic, fragile, unable to handle the rough and tumble of life. It was a theme he had perfected years ago. Audrey, sensing perhaps a flicker of my discomfort, tried to interject. So, Melanie, Dean mentioned you're new to the area. What do you think of Ohio so far? But Dean smoothly brought it back. Melanie loves it, but let's hear about Jed. Remember the time he tried out for the school play, Our Town, and forgot all his lines? Had to hide backstage, red as a beet. He chuckled, raising his glass. To old times, Jed, and to the enduring spirit of, shall we say, personal growth. I sat there feeling professionally dissected, my past laid bare and twisted, presented as a series of lovable failures. To Audrey, I was being reduced to a lovable loser, a harmless, clumsy figure from a distant past, rather than the capable, respected man I had become. The dinner finally ended, a slow, drawn-out affair that left me feeling wrung out. As we stood by the hostess stand, waiting for our coats, Dean clapped me on the shoulder, a firm, almost paternal gesture. Good seeing you, Jed. Old times, eh? His handshake was quick, professional, already moving on. Then he turned to Audrey. Again, he took her hand. This time, he didn't just hold it. He seemed to cup it, his fingers lingering on her palm. His gaze was direct, unwavering. Audrey, he said, his voice dropping slightly, it was a genuine pleasure meeting you. You're even more lovely than Jed described. Audrey blushed, a faint color rising in her cheeks, and offered a soft, almost shy smile. Oh, Dean, you're too kind. I watched them, a knot tightening in my stomach. It was quick, a fleeting second, but I saw it. Something subtle, unsettling passed between them. A recognition, a spark of connection that felt entirely out of place, almost illicit. It was the same shift I'd seen in high school. The way girls' eyes would linger on Dean, the way they'd unconsciously adjust their posture. The air around them seemed to thicken, a momentary, shared current that excluded Melanie and me. Then just as quickly, it was gone, swallowed by Dean's casual grin and the polite goodbyes. Later that night, the house was quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of pages as Audrey read in bed. I lay beside Brea staring at the ceiling, the unsettling dinner replaying in my mind. I could feel her presence, but it was distant, like she was miles away, lost in her own thoughts. Her usual evening hum, a soft, content sound, was absent. So, I began, breaking the silence, my voice sounding louder than I intended. What did you think of Dean? Audrey didn't look up from her book, a thick novel by a British author she admired. Her finger traced the words on the page. Oh, he was interesting. Her voice was vague, noncommittal. Interesting how, I pressed, trying to keep my tone light. She sighed, a small, almost imperceptible breath, and finally lowered the book to her lap. She looked at me then, her eyes thoughtful. He's certainly charismatic, Jed. Very confident. She paused, then added, and he tells a good story. There was a small, knowing smile on her lips, a private amusement that made my hackles rise. He hasn't changed, I said, the words coming out sharper than I'd intended. Still the same showman, still picking apart people for his own amusement. He was always like that. Audrey frowned slightly, her gaze softening. Oh, Jed, don't be silly. People grow up. You're letting your past color your view of him. You always were a little dramatic about things from high school. She reached out, patting my arm, a gesture that felt more dismissive than comforting. He seemed perfectly charming to me, and Melanie was lovely. I'm glad we went. I wanted to argue, to explain the nuances of Dean's cruelty, the way he operated, how it wasn't just kids being kids. I wanted to tell her that his charm was a weapon, that his confidence was a shield for something darker. But the words seemed to catch in my throat. Audrey had already picked up her book, her eyes scanning the page, effectively closing off the conversation. The soft rustle of pages filled the silence again, a quiet barrier between us. For the next few weeks, I tried to ignore the persistent unease that gnawed at me. I threw myself into work, focusing on the details of the steel contract with Pritchard Industries. The numbers, the logistics, the timelines, they were solid, predictable. I told myself I was overthinking things, That Dean was just a blast from the past, a brief, annoying detour. Audrey's routine remained the same. Morning coffee, work, evenings spent reading or watching a quiet show. Nothing had visibly changed. Yet a subtle shift had occurred, a faint echo of that unsettling current I'd witnessed between them. It lingered just out of reach, a shadow at the edges of my peripheral vision. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind we usually cherished. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen, a comforting scent that had always signaled the start of a relaxed weekend. I was at the counter, spooning grounds into the filter, while Audrey was upstairs, the faint sound of the shower a steady backdrop. The morning light was soft, filtering through the kitchen window, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air. Then Audrey's phone, which she'd left lying beside her half-finished cup of tea, buzzed, a small vibration against the granite countertop. I glanced at it, not out of curiosity, but habit. The screen lit up, displaying a message preview. My blood turned to ice. Two things jumped out, stark and brutal against the white text: Dean 450 and meet tonight. My hands, which had been steady just moments before, began to tremble, sending a faint rattling sound through the coffee pot. My breath hitched. Dean, meet tonight. My mind, usually orderly, went blank, then raced, unable to form coherent thoughts. I knew instantly. The cold dread that had been a subtle undercurrent for weeks now spread through me like a physical poison, gripping my chest, making the solid ground beneath my feet feel like quicksand. The familiar kitchen, with its neat appliances and family photos, suddenly seemed alien, hostile. I picked up the phone. It felt heavy, a cold weight in my shaking hand. My thumb, guided by a terrible compulsion, pressed the screen. The full message appeared. Dean Pritchard. Are we still meeting tonight as planned? Can't wait. The words seemed to burn into my retina. Can't wait. A profound sense of sickness washed over me, a gut-wrenching realization that everything I had believed to be true, everything I had trusted, was a lie. The air felt thin, suffocating. I struggled to breathe, my lungs refusing to cooperate. My world, my carefully constructed, predictable world, was shattering into a million pieces. My thumb, still trembling, scrolled up. I found previous messages, a terrifying progression. At first they were vague, innocent even. Good to reconnect. Hope you had a good day. Then they shifted. Subtle, insidious. Dean Pritchard. Missed you already. Dinner was lovely. Dean Pritchard. Thinking of you, Audrey. Let me know if you need anything at all. Dean Pritchard. Can't wait for Saturday. Counting down the hours. The dates on the messages spanned the last few weeks. A slow, deliberate erosion of trust, happening right under my nose. Each message was a fresh cut, a confirmation of the betrayal. I felt a profound sense of violation, a sickness deep in my bones. It wasn't just Audrey's disloyalty, it was Dean's calculated malice, his specific targeting, his quiet infiltration. This wasn't a sudden mistake. It was a planned, deliberate ambush. Just then the shower upstairs stopped. A few seconds later, I heard the faint sound of footsteps on the landing. Audrey. She was humming a quiet tune, oblivious, coming downstairs. My heart hammered against my ribs. Instinct took over. With a surge of adrenaline, I shoved the phone back onto the counter, precisely where it had been, the screen dark. I turned my back to it, forcing my trembling hands to grip the edge of the counter. I pretended I saw nothing, knew nothing, my mind reeling, trying desperately to process the unprocessable. She walked into the kitchen, wrapped in a plush towel, her hair damp. Morning, sleepyhead, she said, her voice bright. Coffee smells wonderful. I turned, forcing my face into a semblance of normalcy. The corners of my mouth felt stiff, stretched into a strained, unnatural smile. Morning, Aud, I managed, the words catching in my throat. Good shower? Wonderful, she replied, reaching for her mug. Warm and long. She smiled, a carefree, easy smile that felt like a punch to my gut. The silence in the house, once comforting, became deafening, filled with unspoken truths, with the heavy weight of the secret now crushing me. The days that followed were a blur, a strange, distorted reality I moved through in a fog. My senses, once dulled by routine, became hyper-alert, sharpened by a terrible purpose. I observed Audrey with a detached intensity, every gesture, Every word, every shift in her routine, now a potential clue. Our home, which had always been a sanctuary, transformed into a surveillance zone. Subtle changes began to surface, like weeds pushing through cracked pavement. There was a new perfume, something floral and sweet, distinct from the familiar lavender she usually favored. It clung to her clothes, a faint, lingering scent I recognized, though I couldn't place it. The late nights became more frequent. She'd explain them away. Girls' night out, working late on a volunteer project. Melanie and I had coffee, then just kept talking. Her explanations were vague, thin, like stretched fabric. She'd come home, always after I was in bed, the faint click of the front door at 11:37 p.m., then the quiet rustle of her getting ready for sleep. I would lie awake, listening, pretending to be asleep, the questions burning holes in my mind. Adding to the torment, the steel contract with Pritchard Industries moved forward. My professional interactions with Dean were a twisted pantomime of cordiality. We discussed tonnage, delivery schedules, payment terms, while I knew what he was doing behind my back. He was the picture of an affable, demanding client, oblivious to the internal earthquake that was tearing my world apart. I'd nod, offer concise answers, shake his hand, all while my stomach churned and a cold fury simmered beneath my skin. My internal world was crumbling, a slow, agonizing collapse. I began to piece together timelines, like a detective working a cold case. Audrey's late night at the library on a Tuesday coincided with the time Dean had mentioned being stuck in town for an unexpected meeting. Her weekend shopping trip with Melanie had too many unaccounted for hours, too many vague details. Alibis were checked, silently, against the limited information I had. Discrepancies piled up, small, unsettling gaps in her stories that now screamed betrayal. My own home became foreign. I walked its familiar rooms, touched its familiar objects, but felt like a stranger, an unwelcome guest. I was a detective in my own life, meticulously gathering evidence against the woman I had sworn to cherish. It was a lonely, isolating existence. The thought of confronting Audrey clawed at me. The words, the accusations, formed in my head, sharp and bitter. But then a colder fear took hold. Her denial, her tears, her skilled ability to make me question my own sanity, to turn my suspicions back on me. "You're imagining things, Jed," she would say. "You're letting your old issues with Dean get the best of you." She could lie, and I knew it. And without undeniable proof, I would be left adrift, accused of paranoia, my own judgment clouded. I needed something solid, something that couldn't be refuted, couldn't be twisted. It was a path I knew I shouldn't be on, but sometimes a man gets cornered and makes choices he never thought he would. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Late one night after Audrey had gone to sleep, I sat at my laptop. The screen light illuminated my face in the dark study. I researched. Tiny digital voice recorder. Covert listening devices. The results brought up dozens of options. I settled on one, small enough to fit in the palm of my hand, with long battery life and a sensitive microphone. I ordered it, the transaction feeling illicit, shameful. It arrived 2 days later in an unmarked package. I rationalized my actions, telling myself it wasn't about revenge. It was about sanity. It was about knowing the truth, whatever it was, for my future. For our future, if there still was one. The night before the big contract signing, I returned to my office after everyone had left. The building was dark, silent, save for the hum of the ventilation system. I went directly to the main conference room, the one reserved for executive meetings. The large mahogany table dominated the space. With a precise, methodical movement, I knelt, pulling a small magnet from my pocket. I found a discreet spot underneath the table, near where Dean's chair would be, and meticulously pressed the tiny recorder into place. It was barely visible, camouflaged by the dark wood. I flicked the tiny switch to record. I knew he would be there tomorrow, across the table from me, the man screwing my wife. The meeting for the final contract signing was held in the large conference room, exactly as planned. I sat across the polished mahogany table from Dean, the long stretch of wood a deceptive barrier between us. He was all smiles, confident and charming, just as he had been at dinner. My internal world was a storm of ice and fire, but my external self remained a fortress of professional composure. We went through the steel contract line by line, discussing clauses, delivery schedules, and payment terms. My voice was steady, my handshake firm. Dean made a few casual comments during the meeting, innocuous remarks that, to anyone else, would mean nothing. Glad we could make this happen, Jed. It's been a long time coming. Or, hope this partnership proves mutually beneficial. You never know where these things can lead. Each word, each turn of phrase, was now laced with a sinister double meaning, like tiny shards of glass embedded in my skin. He was enjoying this, the hidden game, the quiet, corrosive victory. I could feel it radiating off him. The meeting concluded with a round of handshakes and polite expressions of future cooperation. As soon as Dean and his team departed, I waited a few minutes, allowing the office noise to resume its normal hum. Then, with my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs, I slipped back into the conference room. I knelt under the table, my fingers searching for the small magnetic device. My hand closed around it. It was still there, the tiny indicator, light a steady, reassuring green. I retrieved it, slipping it into my pocket, the cold plastic, a tangible weight against my thigh. Back in my office, I closed the door, the sound echoing unnaturally in the sudden quiet. My hands were shaking again as I pulled the recorder out. I plugged in a small earbud, a cheap one I kept in my desk drawer. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and pressed play. Static. Then Dean's voice, clear and distinct. Melanie's gone for the weekend. House is empty. Then Audrey's voice, her soft laugh, a sound that usually brought me comfort, now tore through me like a jagged blade. So you remembered. How could I forget? Dean's low chuckle, intimate, possessive. You're unforgettable, Audrey. More so than Jed could ever imagine. My stomach lurched. The words, raw and explicit, continued. They discussed details, dates, places, their plans for that very night, their shared amusement at my unwitting presence during the dinner, their casual dismissal of my feelings, my existence. It was all there, the raw, painful truth, stripped bare, confirming my deepest, most horrifying fears. It wasn't just physical, it was an emotional demolition, a planned, deliberate violation. That evening, I waited for Audrey to come home. She walked in carrying a bag from the grocery store, her face bright, humming a tune. She looked up, saw me standing in the living room, hands clenched at my sides. Her smile faltered. Jed, what's wrong? She asked, her voice tinged with immediate concern. I said nothing. I walked to the kitchen counter, picked up her phone, and placed it in front of her. Then I pulled the recorder from my pocket, plugged in the earbuds, and handed them to her. Listen, I said, my voice unnaturally calm, flat. Listen to what you've been doing. Her eyes widened, fear dawning in them. She put on the earbuds, hesitant. A few seconds later, her face crumpled. The grocery bag slid from her fingers, apples and oranges scattering across the floor. Her shoulders began to shake. Her denial, I knew, was dissolving into tears, shame, and a desperate, guttural plea for forgiveness. Amidst the searing pain, a cold, hard resolve settled within me. This wasn't just about hurt. It was about a future, or the lack thereof. When she finally pulled the earbuds out, her face streaked with tears, she looked at me, a broken thing. Jed, please, she choked out. I'm so sorry. I can't explain. Please don't leave me. You end it, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet firm, unyielding. You end it with him, tonight. Or I'm walking away, for good. She nodded frantically, tears streaming. Yes, I will. Just, please don't tell anyone. Don't tell Dean. Please. Her words were desperate, terrified, not of losing me, I realized, but of exposure, of him knowing that I knew. I pretended to accept Audrey's repentance, her tears, her desperate promises, the trembling in her voice. I acknowledged them with a nod, a quiet word. But the betrayal, a venomous snake, had coiled itself around my heart, squeezing tighter with each passing minute. The wound was too fresh, too deep to scab over. My pain, however, was quickly hardening into something colder, more focused. A plan. A precise, calculated retribution aimed squarely at Dean Pritchard. I knew Dean's weaknesses. His arrogance, his insatiable greed, his dismissive attitude towards anyone he deemed beneath him. He was a shark, always circling, always looking for the biggest, easiest kill. And I, strange Jed, was about to become the bait. I formulated the plan, leveraging the very business deal that had brought him back into my life. A few days later, I approached Dean with a new proposal, separate from the primary contract we had just signed. Dean, I began, my voice even, I've been looking at some market trends. There's an opportunity for a high-volume, speculative order on a specific grade of specialty steel. It's a bit unconventional, but the potential upside is huge. I laid out the numbers, subtly inflating the potential profits, painting a picture of effortless wealth. I talked about a rare window, a fleeting chance to corner a niche market before anyone else caught on. My pitch was laced with just enough technical jargon to sound legitimate, but also with an undercurrent of urgency, designed to appeal to his risk-taking nature. I watched his eyes, seeing the glint of avarice, the sudden widening of his pupils. He was taking the bait. Dean leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. Speculative, eh, Jed? Sounds a bit outside Miller Steel's usual comfort zone. But then you always were a bit of a dark horse, weren't you? He chuckled, a dismissive sound. Let me guess, you're looking for a partner, someone with the capital and the guts to move on something like this. His tone suggested I was simply a minor player, bringing him a golden opportunity, too small to seize it myself. He saw me as strange Jed, the guy who once cried when he missed a pop fly. He saw easy money, a quick score, a chance to further inflate his already massive ego by showing me how a real businessman operated. Exactly, I affirmed, allowing a hint of feigned humility to color my voice. It's a big order, too big for Miller to carry alone without substantial risk. But with Pritchard Industries backing it, the profits would be astronomical. I knew the market for that specific steel was about to crash, plummeting in value due to oversupply and a sudden drop in demand from a major overseas manufacturer. My sources, cultivated over years in the industry, were reliable. We drafted the contract. I ensured the terms were ironclad, but critically, they left Dean entirely exposed. Pritchard Industries would be on the hook for the full purchase order, with Miller Steel acting only as the broker, taking a generous commission up front. Any losses from a market downturn would fall solely on Dean. He barely looked at the fine print, his mind already counting the imaginary stacks of money. His arrogance, his certainty of superior intellect, blinded him to the trap I had so carefully laid. I watched him across the table, shaking his hand after he signed, a genuine smile now playing on my lips. It was a cold, satisfying feeling. I remembered the playground taunts, the locker room humiliations, the way he'd always made me feel small. Payback, a dish best served cold and precise, was coming. Audrey, meanwhile, tried to reconnect. She left notes on my pillow, made my favorite meals, initiated conversations about our future. But I remained distant. The wound was too fresh, too deep. I played the part of the wounded husband, slowly healing, but inside I was a coiled spring, focused only on the next move. I also made sure that Miller Steel, my company, was completely insulated from any fallout. This was my personal war, and I wouldn't let it harm the innocent. The market crashed, not with a bang, but a slow, grinding descent that started subtly and then plummeted with brutal efficiency. The demand for that specific grade of specialty steel evaporated almost overnight, just as my sources had predicted. Dean Pritchard's speculative order, once a potential goldmine, became a crushing liability. His construction empire, stretched thin by other ventures, took a massive hit. The news reports were discreet at first, then increasingly bold, detailing the unforeseen market shifts that had blindsided Pritchard Industries, leading to immense losses. He called me in, not to my office, but to his own, the opulent space now feeling heavy, almost claustrophobic. His face was mottled red, his eyes bulging with a furious realization. "You," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at me across his polished desk. "You played me. You set this up, didn't you, Jedediah? All of it." The arrogance was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated rage. I looked at him, feeling an unsettling calm. The quiet satisfaction was there, a cold ember in my chest, but it was mixed with a weariness I hadn't anticipated. "Yes, Dean," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I did. You took something from me, something I valued." I leaned forward slightly, meeting his furious gaze. "You saw me as strange Jed, didn't you? Someone you could always mess with, always get away with it. You thought you could just waltz back into my life, humiliate me and take my wife, and there would be no consequences." Dean's jaw worked, his eyes narrowing to slits. "My wife?" he spluttered, momentarily distracted from the financial ruin. "What are you talking about?" "The recorder, Dean," I said simply. "In the conference room, you and Audrey discussing your little arrangement. I heard it all." The color drained from his face, leaving it pasty white. Humiliation, stark and raw, replaced the rage. He was caught, exposed. His elaborate facade of invincibility, his casual cruelty, had finally been unmasked. He tried to threaten me, his voice hoarse. "You can't prove anything. This will ruin you too, Jed. You played with fire." I just shook my head. "The contract is ironclad, Dean. Your lawyers confirmed it. Miller Steel acted as a broker. Pritchard Industries took the risk. My company is insulated. And as for ruining me," I allowed a bitter smile to touch my lips. "You already did that, Dean. What else do I have to lose?" He had no leverage, no escape. His own greed and arrogance had woven the rope that now tightened around his neck. Dean's reputation, once a gilded monument to success, crumbled with shocking speed. The business world buzzed with the story of his catastrophic misjudgment, the reckless gamble that had cost his company millions. The media, scenting blood, began to dig deeper, uncovering other questionable deals, other instances of his ruthless, self-serving tactics. The Golden Boy was tarnished, his empire teetering. I watched the news reports, the grim satisfaction a heavy weight in my chest. There was a quiet triumph, yes, a sense of justice served, but it was laced with my own lingering pain, a hollowness that even Dean's downfall couldn't fill. The act of revenge hadn't brought the profound peace I might have hoped for. Audrey learned of Dean's ruin and of my part in it from the same news reports. I saw a new kind of fear in her eyes when she looked at me, a realization of the cold, calculated man I had become. And beneath the fear, perhaps a sliver of grudging respect for the depth of my resolve. Our marriage, already shattered by her betrayal, now faced the added burden of my calculated retribution. Trust, once a bedrock, was irrevocably broken, replaced by a chasm. I sat in the quiet of my living room, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Dean had paid a price, a significant one. But the moral reckoning was far more complex, more enduring, for everyone involved. For Audrey, for me. The justice I sought had been delivered, but it left behind a heavy burden, a hollow victory. I began to consider my future, a path forward that felt uncertain, perhaps alone, perhaps towards a genuine, arduous healing. The cost of betrayal, I realized, was never truly borne by just one person. It lingered, a corrosive legacy, shaping the lives of all who touched it. The dust settled slowly, though the air in our home remained thick with unseen particles. Dean Pritchard's fall was complete, a dramatic implosion that made headlines for weeks. His name became a cautionary tale, a testament to unchecked ambition and carelessness. I watched it unfold, not with joy, but with a weary satisfaction. The scale of his ruin felt proportionate to the depth of his transgression, a cold equation balanced. Audrey moved through the days with a quiet apprehension. The fear in her eyes had not entirely faded, replaced by a guarded deference. Our conversations were clipped, factual, devoid of the old warmth. We lived in the same house, shared the same meals, but the bridge between us was gone, burned by betrayal and rebuilt with the ashes of calculated revenge. I had achieved a form of justice, but it came at a price I was still paying, one I suspect I would continue to pay for a long time. The quiet Midwestern life I had cherished was irrevocably changed, replaced by a lingering chill.